Hi, I'm Ann Haas. I was born in a little town in Shikshini, Pennsylvania, Preemie, and I grew up there. Went to a one-room schoolhouse, and I went to Sunday school regularly, taken by my grandmother. My parents did not go to church, and my grandmother, and my great-grandparents were Christians. And about when I was 10 or 11 years old, I was taken to a Christian rally, they called them, with an evangelist, and I went forward, and I think that's the day that I became a Christian. But as I went back to this church, it was used the Methodist literature, which was very liberal, and I got no one fed me, and but I just, from then on, I had a different attitude, and I knew I was seeking more to be like the Lord. So then we'll move ahead to when I was a senior in high school. Actually, when I was a junior, my aunt and my mother both became Christians, and they were very concerned about my going away to college, and they both prayed day after day that before I went to college that I would really know the Lord. And that summer, my aunt was teaching a children's Bible study called Child Evangelism, and to get me there, my best girlfriend was a artist, and I went with her and heard the word simply presented to the children, and then that's when I made my commitment. So I went off my first year in college to Penn State Satellite, because you couldn't go to the state college. It was so full of veterans and their families. So you had to take your first year in a satellite. And then I was convicted that I wanted to go to a Christian school. So I went to a Christian school called King's College, which was in Delaware, and for my sophomore year.
Hi, I'm Jack, her significant other. We're on the fifth row, the left-hand side, every Sunday morning to the first service. I guess my story is a very conventional one. I was raised in a Christian family by Christian parents who were very serious about their Christianity. And they were also very serious about music. And my younger brother and I each had to learn the piano, well, presumably, and also to play an instrument. My brother's was the violin, mine the trumpet. And so there were times in the day when we'd be each practicing in other rooms and playing to enough loudly to overcome the other. But we got along and we did quite well. And I certainly am thankful to my parents for being, shall I say, very serious about practicing. And that was not easy for me because I just wanted to be out playing ball like the rest of the kids. But anyway, we grew up, Ann and I, in the Depression years, the Great Depression. And we also grew up in the war years. And each night, around 5 minutes of 9, I'd hear, "This is London calling," and I'd hear the bombs falling. And the description of that event still impresses me. And as we grew up in the Depression and World War II, it wasn't normal. Guys went off to war and didn't come back. Kid down the street was a Marine at 16 and headed for Iwo Jima and didn't come back. And that made quite an impression on us. But one of the bigger impressions that was made on the people of our church, and especially the young people, as the soldiers came back after World War II, was their great desire to serve on the mission field. And a good number of them did. And it seemed that all we ever did was talking about going to missions. Well, Jack wanted to be a geologist, a Christian geologist. And that put me at odds with some of the other folk. And issues about science and Christianity were even important in those days. And I began to be a bit odd. But regardless of that, my biggest problem was money. How do I pay for college? Can I get into college? Scholarships were few and far between in those days. And so I had to really scratch. So every penny I got, I put in the bank, or war bonds. 50 cents an hour went pretty far in those days, but not far enough. And so when it finally came time to go to college and I looked for a career in geology, I thought, well, I'll try it. Go 1 year, then see what happens. Fortunately, some family members thought I had some potential. And so they kicked in a little money, and I ended up going to the King's College and working in geology. And I enjoyed the first 2 years. But then after the second year, I ran out of money. And so I had to come back and work for a year. But the trouble is I couldn't find a job. But finally, I did get a job with the E.I. DuPont Company in Wilmington, Delaware, at their experimental station. And that was the great shift for me into chemistry. And by working on the job as what they would call an intern these days, I really learned what chemistry was about and what the lab was about, and I thought of the future. Well, then I came back to King's and sat down and played the piano one day, and the rest is history.
All right, so this piano player that when I was a sophomore came down to see his friends and would be always in the lounge playing the piano, I was a little bit enamored with him. And but I didn't. Once I was introduced to him by one of his friends, but that was all. And so lo and behold, in my junior year, when I signed up for my chemistry course, I found out that my lab instructor is this piano player. So he was also playing for a girls' trio, one of which was my closest friend and roommate. And she was kind of interested in this young man. And so we talked about it, and she said, "Oh, there's no hope. He's got a girlfriend back home, so I'll just forget it." So after a few weeks, called me aside and he said, "Would you help me wash glassware and clean up?" He said, "You know, you're always look a little bit neat." And he said, "Would you help me neaten the lab?" And I said, "Oh, sure." So it went along, and then just before Christmas break, he was running an evening session to prepare for a big exam. Now, if you know that organic chemistry is the most difficult chemistry for biology majors. So we were all there, and as we left, everybody was going out the door. He says, "Wait a minute," and I thought, "Oh dear, am I in trouble?" And he says he doesn't talk to women, he just would talk over his shoulder. He never had sisters, so over his shoulder he said, "Would you go out to the basketball game with me?" And I said, but I can't. I have to study for this exam tomorrow. He says, oh, there's nothing to it. He said, you know it. And I said, okay, I'll go. And what's more, it was after the half and you didn't have to pay to get in. So that was my first date. And after Christmas, when we came back, we started to, going seriously together. And when I invited him home for Easter vacation to meet my folks, we went out, and one night we were in the orchard where my grandfather had orchards all around, and under an apple blossom tree, and he proposed. Well, I didn't answer because I thought he was joking, but that was serious. And we were engaged we didn't announce it until the next February. And that summer, he was playing then for a quartet or men's quartet, and I got a job. And at the end of the summer, we were married. And then I got a teaching job in Delaware, and he was going to graduate school. I was going to graduate school, and then we managed to finish at the same time. He got his doctorate when I got my master's, and we went to Grove City, and he taught there, and then we came here.
And professionally, what kind of work did you do?
Well, when we were first married, I was a science teacher, first in junior high, and then high school biology. But then I took a leave to raise my children, and when they got a little older, I went to work at Gordon College, worked with Dick Wright and also Russ Camp, and the natural science lab work. And I was there for 20 years.
And so we came to New England, and Burton Goddard had sent us a letter out in Grove City, and he asked us to take a look at the church, told something about the history of the church, and we promised him we would come. So that first time we came, and that was history too, because we were able to, this was fall 1961, become members of the church and participate in all the activities. In fact, in those days, you had to participate in all the activities because there were only a few of us. And I think one of the real pleasures has been seeing over the years our church become what I call a full-service church, one that can serve and minister to all sorts of people, all sorts of age groups, and be a full-service church. And I'm so thankful that we have come up to that point.
I'd like to say a little bit more about the church as it developed, and the jobs that I enjoyed so much. I enjoyed teaching 2-year-olds. I was a high school and college teacher, but I was asked to do it for a few weeks, and 17 years later I retired from teaching 2-year-olds. So, and it just, even as my husband mentioned today, when the kids come and they've graduated from high school, ready to go to college, and I see those kids, and it blesses me. Then being a trustee, working with so many great people with all the projects, it's how you really get to know people. They just become part of you, and that was a joy as well. And as I saw how God had blessed us, how we went from the church in Hamilton to the church in Ipswich, and how it's grown, and it's just a testimony to God's faithfulness. But then also, as we talk about our marriage, we were married in 1953, so this will be our 64th anniversary, and how much the church has contributed to that. There were examples of the older people who started the church, and we had them as prime examples of the consideration and the love that they have in marriage, and that, but also their dependency on God. to keep that marriage together. And it not only the good times but the bad times, when you have problems with children, when they break your heart, when some of them turn away from, or grandchildren turn away from God. It's heartbreaking, but I just think, what would you do if you didn't have Christ to depend on? And another thing that has given me comfort is that my own two brothers, one became a Christian at 73, and the other became a Christian on his deathbed. And my mother prayed for them from the day she became a Christian, and she didn't see either of those happenings, but she was faithful. And so that gives me great comfort with my own members of my family. And Jack and I stand together in this constant prayer and uplifting, and it's only by his grace that we trust and know that it's all in his hands.
Well, I would like to comment a bit on the later years of life. Nobody wants to hear about that, and certainly nobody wants to go through it. But I think one of the joys of the church has been my friendships over the years with many people, even the ministers. And of course, as the organist for many years, I would collaborate with them on singable and non-singable hymns, and et cetera, and it was very enjoyable. And of course, I would always be involved in weddings and funerals, but it was a different role when I retired from playing instruments, because my hands just wouldn't work anymore. And I had to look for new friendships, because many of the people that I had known, I had been in fellowships with, and were gone. So over the last maybe 5 or 6 years, I built up a lot of friendships of people who are a generation younger than I am, and that has been very, very valuable. I've gotten to know guys really well, and the small groups that have emerged for my kind of people have been very helpful to me, and we're all looking forward to the fall startup again. And I think that it's important for congregations to think about their older people. Not all of them are wealthy or prepared for medical disability, and I guess nobody is. But I think the pulling together and the willingness to go and serve the deacons, who have a tough job at times, is important. I can remember one example, and I'll close with this. It had to do with one of our members whose wife had died, and he had to go for dialysis. And what was it, about every other day? And at that time, we were a relatively small church, and at that time, there were about 15 people in the church who would take him, sit there over the couple of hours, bring him back, and then somebody the next day would do it. And that was a really rich experience. We was all boys, including the minister, and it got done. And so I think you can all find a place, and I'll give a cheer for the deacons and their requests for meals, and thank them for serving us too in our moments of being ill.
Just one of the last things that I'd like to say is that you cannot be over-involved. You need to just make yourself become part of the church. It's so important, from the youngest to the oldest, that you should some way be able to become part of the church. It's where you grow, it's where you learn, it's where you join that church family, and it's the interaction that the scripture talks about, that we are brethren and that we need to support each other. And even the most menial task you think might not be important, but one of the most important things I remember is when we would have work days, we would have families come, and even the little kids would have a job, and they felt so close. So I urge each one of you to find a spot if you haven't found one already. That's so important in your life and in the life of your church.
And what do you think is your gift that God has given you?
Well, I guess from my nickname, it's Clutterbusting. And it's simply, it's a passion of mine, I guess, because I cannot function in chaos. So I think God did that, so that is my gift, to help people. It thrills me to help people when they are in need, when they get behind because of some calamity, or when they get overwhelmed. It's just the greatest thing for me to be able to help them. And I'm not great about meal preparation, but I love to go in and clean somebody's house or help them in that way. So I guess that's the one gift I might have. The other is, as a trustee, to work with people like Don Haggis and Dan Granz, and just to lend my hand in making the property more usable and more attractive.
And for those people who have need of furniture, you had some plan or a strategy. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, that was the hand of God. When we were, a number of times when the missionaries were coming home, we were getting their homes ready for them, or the apartments ready for them. And so I just prayed, God help me. I'm telling you, we found the greatest things along the side of the road. We found neighbors who said, "Oh, what are you doing?" And it was even interesting. One of the boys' rooms, when Greg came back, we got 2 beds. One was a twin-size car bed, and the other was a youth-sized car bed, and they all matched. And a neighbor came over, and she made car racing drapes and bought red throws to match. And I said, God not only just brought furniture, he bought matching things. So it was amazing how he worked, and how we would ask different people or different groups of people to take a room, and they would furnish that room and be in the control of it. And the house was totally, and this was a large apartment for 6 people.
So, Anne, didn't you have like a reserved furniture just in case when people need it?
Oh yes, we would have.
Explain to me how that worked.
We had some space in the attic, and we would, when one missionary would go, we would store things up there ready for the next person to come. We would store some things at our home. We have a garage and a basement, and we had people who knew that we were always looking for something, and when they wanted to get rid of something, they'd call us and say, "Can you use this?" So, and I think that was all of the Lord. He works in every little detail.
And how long have you been serving as trustee?
For 42 years.
Jack, I know you're elder, and can you tell us how long you've been elder, and what was the most rewarding thing about being an elder?
Well, I served officially from about 1962 to the year 2000, about 40 years. And in one sense, it was a particular challenge by Charlie Wingard that if we would be willing to fund a youth director, that within a few months he would pay for himself. And it ended up that John really did it. That was one of the most remarkable shifts in our church population. And we've only gone back to one service Sundays in the summer ever since. It just, we were in two services. We just all got excited about how we now had one service, and then, darn it, all those kids and their parents came and we couldn't handle the congregation. So to me, that was the most enjoyable thing that's happened particularly, but there's plenty others.
What did you learn about God that had most impact in your life?
The thing that was most impacted my life is that I learned about his faithfulness, and a lot of it was from the church, because as we progressed from a small church to a larger church, to a much larger church, and to a church with satellites, each time God provided the right pastor and the right group of people, and you could tell that it was of him, and that was the only reason that happened. And it just once again reaffirmed how faithful he is if we trust him.
I'll answer that question that you asked Ann by this. It's the song Trust and Obey. And if there's one thing that music has done to me, is that I now think in terms of hymn titles. It's amazing how that happens. Point in a sermon, I immediately go to a hymn title to reflect on it. And so music has been a real joy in my life.